thinking about that night. It's been 6 years, but the memory is still sharp, like frostbite you can feel under the skin even after it heals. My uncle's farmhouse in rural Kentucky never seemed sinister by daylight. It was just old, faded white paint, porch swing with rusted chains, 30 acres of pasture stitched together with wire fence. The kind of place that smelled like hay, diesel, and rain. But when the sun went down, when that last bit of orange light drained from the fields, it became something else entirely. No street lights, no neighbors, just silence so deep it hummed in your ears. You could hear your heartbeat in it, slow and thick. And sometimes, if you stayed quiet long enough, you'd realize the silence wasn't empty. It was listening back. My aunt was the first to notice. She's the type who laughs at ghost shows and scoffs at creaky floors. But a few months after they moved in, she started hearing things outside. Footsteps on the gravel driveway long after midnight. Slow, heavy, deliberate steps. Then came the splash. It always happened in that order. Footsteps first, then splash. Like someone walked up from the road, across the yard, and straight into the pond. She'd shine her flashlight through the window and see only ripples spreading on the water's surface. No footprints in the gravel. No sound after. Just the dogs trembling at the door, their tails pressed tight to their legs. My uncle said it was raccoons. Maybe a deer. She didn't argue, but she stopped sitting on the porch after dark. I remember the first Sunday dinner she told us about it. I laughed. Probably a heron, I said. They wade through ponds at night. Herons don't sound like boots, she said quietly. She wasn't joking. My cousin Eddie, their only son, was a skeptic. Engineering student, data-oriented, logical. Mom stressed, he said. She grew up in town. Every noise out here sounds like Bigfoot. When she told him about the footsteps and the splash, he decided to prove her wrong. I'll stay home alone while you two visit Grandma this weekend, he said. I'll record everything. You'll see it's nothing. He was 23. Confident, bored, brave in the way people are before life gives him a reason not to be. That Friday, he set up his camera on a tripod facing the front window, put 2 beers on the coffee table, turned on the TV for background noise. The dogs, both German shepherds, lay near his feet. He texted me around midnight. Dead quiet. Mom's nuts. I didn't hear from him again until the next morning. When my phone rang at 9 a.m., his voice didn't sound like his. It was high, breathless. The way people sound when they're pretending not to cry. Come get me, he said. Where? Sunoco off Highway 12. That was a 20-minute drive from the farm. When I found him, he was sitting barefoot on the curb outside the gas station. Sweatpants, t-shirt, no shoes. His feet were raw, scratched by gravel. His eyes were bloodshot. He didn't even wait for me to park. He opened the passenger door and got in, locking it behind him like a reflex. What the hell happened? He just stared straight ahead. Then, slowly, I heard it. It started around 2:15 a.m., he said. The dogs woke first. Their ears perked up, heads snapping toward the door. Then came the gravel crunching. Steady, rhythmic. The weight of boots on crushed stone. He muted the TV. The steps got louder. The dogs backed up, growling, hackles raised. Then the splash came. Loud, heavy, like something the size of a man, or bigger, had jumped in. I thought maybe someone was trespassing, he said. So I grabbed the flashlight and went to window. The pond was glowing, not like light from above, like something under the surface was burning dim and cold, bluish white. He saw ripples spreading outward from the center. Then the pounding started. Not knocking, he said. Pounding. Like fists. 3 hits. Each one made the door rattle in its frame. The dogs lost it. Barking, whining, running in circles. Eddie froze. He said water started dripping from the small window in the door. Just a few drops at first, then steady rivulets sliding down the glass like rain. Except it wasn't raining. Another 3 hits. Harder this time. The whole house shook. I ran, he whispered. He bolted through the kitchen, out the back, across the field barefoot. The dogs followed. He didn't stop running until he hit the road. He never went back. When my aunt and uncle came home the next day, they found everything just as he'd left it. Beer half finished, TV still on, front door locked. No damage. No footprints. No mud. The only thing out of place was the dogs. They were waiting on the porch, muddy up to their chests, tails tucked tight. They drained the pond a few months later. Found nothing but silt and trash, beer cans, branches, an old tire. The county filled it in after that. My aunt never heard the footsteps again. Eddie moved to Cincinnati, got a job at a tech firm. Never talks about that night unless he's had a few drinks. One time, after 3 beers, he told me he dreamed about the pond. Said he saw something rising out of it, long, pale fingers breaking the surface first, followed by a shape that wasn't quite human. It had a face, but no eyes, just smooth skin where the socket should be. It was dripping, he said, dripping even though it wasn't raining. He woke up with his sheets damp. I told him it was just a nightmare. He nodded like he believed me, but his hands were shaking. 2 years later, new owners bought the farmhouse. They rebuilt the barn, planted corn where the pond used to be. I stopped by once out of curiosity. The place looked brighter, cleaner. But when I got out of the car, the air felt the same. Heavy, the kind of stillness that waits. I didn't stay long. A few months after that, my aunt mailed me a flash drive. No note, just a drive and a small envelope. I plugged it in. There was one file, nightfootage.mov. It was Eddie's recording from that night. The first few hours were boring. He watched TV. The dogs slept. Around 2:10 a.m., they lifted their heads. You could hear faint crunching outside, then silence. At 2:14, the video glitched. A single frame froze, the pond visible through the front window, glowing faintly blue. Then came the pounding. The camera trembled on its tripod. 3 booming hits. Between the second and third, for one frame, something appeared at the window. A hand, not flesh-colored. White, like milk poured into water. Fingers too long, pressed against the glass. Then the image flickered, and Eddie's voice screamed off camera. No, no, no. The camera fell. The last thing it caught was the dogs barking, teeth bared at the door. The video cut off at 2:17 a.m. I sat frozen for a long time after that. I called my aunt. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking about the flash drive. She never called back. A week later, I got a text from Eddie. You watched it, didn't you? I replied, yeah. Where did she get it? Mom found it when they cleaned the attic before moving. The camera wasn't there before. She swears it just appeared on the couch one morning. Did you watch it? No, he said. And don't. He never mentioned it again. Years later, I passed by the farm while driving south. Couldn't resist stopping. The pond was long gone, replaced by rows of soybeans. But standing there, you could still see where the ground dipped slightly, a soft depression the shape of the old waterline. Something about it made me uneasy. The soy plants in that area were pale, almost silvery compared to the dark green ones around them. When the wind blew, they moved out of rhythm with the rest. Last summer, Eddie called me out of nowhere. I hadn't heard from him in years. He sounded drunk, or maybe just tired. You ever wonder what it wanted? He asked. What it wanted? The thing in the pond. He paused, then said, sometimes I hear it again. When it rains. The splash. Always 3 steps first, then splash. I told him to stop drinking and hung up. But that night, lying in bed, I dreamed about walking on gravel. 3 steps, then a splash. When I woke up, my window was open. My carpet was wet. I tried rationalizing. Maybe rain leaked in. But the forecast had been clear. For a week, nothing else happened. Then one night, my phone buzzed. A new email from no one. The sender field was blank. Subject line, look outside. Attached was a photo. It was my backyard, taken from somewhere near the fence. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. There was nothing unusual at first glance, just the grass, the shadow of my house, the faint reflection of the moon. But when I zoomed in, I saw it, a shape standing near the bird bath. Tall, too thin. Its reflection shimmered faintly, like light through water. I deleted the email immediately. 2 nights later, my dog refused to go near the back door. She stood rigid, staring at it, growling deep in her throat. When I opened it, the porch light flickered and I heard it, soft and deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Gravel. There's no gravel in my yard. I moved apartments that month. Didn't tell Eddie. Didn't tell anyone. But sometimes, on heavy nights when the air feels thick before rain, I swear I can hear it again. 3 slow steps. And then the splash. Even when there's no water for miles. The green light in the woods. This happened about 7 years ago during our annual family reunion at my grandparents' hunting cabin. It's one of those places so remote that your phone becomes nothing more than a camera, absolutely 0 bars of service. The cabin sits deep in the woods in northern Michigan, and you have to drive about 40 minutes down a dirt road after leaving the highway just to reach it. That particular reunion was bigger than usual. My parents were there along with my brother Jake, my aunt and uncle with their 3 kids, my grandparents, of course, and even my mom's cousin and her husband, who rarely made it to family events. The cabin itself isn't that big, just 4 bedrooms, a main room with a kitchen and a screened-in porch. So it was pretty crowded with all 14 of us there. The day had been normal enough. We'd gone fishing at the lake about a mile from the cabin, had the traditional big cookout with way too much food, and spent the evening around the fire pit telling stories and roasting marshmallows. Nothing unusual at all, just family stuff. As the night wore on, people started heading inside to sleep. My youngest cousin fell asleep in my aunt's lap first. Then the older folks started yawning and making their way to bed. By around 11 at night, it was just me and Jake still sitting by the fire. I was 23 at the time, and he was 25. We weren't really talking much, just staring at the dying embers and enjoying the quiet after a day of constant family chatter. The fire had burned down to mostly coals by then, giving off just enough light to see the immediate area around the pit, but not much beyond. The cars, 5 or 6 of them, were parked in a row maybe 30 feet from where we sat, just barely visible in the dim glow. Everyone had parked along the edge of the clearing where the cabin sits. I remember feeling really peaceful, listening to the crackling of the last bits of wood and the chorus of frogs and crickets in the woods. The moon was just a sliver that night, so beyond the glow of our fire, everything was pitch black. You know how dark it gets when you're really away from civilization. It's not like regular darkness. It's complete, the kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. That's when I first noticed it. At first, I thought I was seeing things, like when your eyes play tricks on you in the dark, but then Jake tensed up beside me, and I knew he'd spotted it too. Between the cars, maybe 3 feet off the ground, was a solid bar of green light. It wasn't a beam like from a flashlight. It was a shape, a horizontal bar about a foot long. The green wasn't neon bright, but it wasn't dim either. It was steady and solid. And the color was wrong somehow, not like any flashlight or glow stick I'd ever seen. It was a deep, almost emerald green, but with an unnatural quality to it. Do you see that? Jake whispered, his voice sounding strange in the quiet night. I nodded, then realized he might not see the gesture in the dark. Yeah, I whispered back. What is that? We watched as this bar of light moved between the first 2 cars. It wasn't bobbing or swaying like it would if someone were carrying it. It moved at the steady, perfectly even pace. Too steady for a person walking, and there was no sound at all. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Just this eerie, silent green bar gliding along. As it passed between the cars, it cast a faint green tint onto the bumpers and the sides of vehicles. The reflection made it clear this wasn't just our imagination. It was something physically there, giving off light. Should we wake everyone up? I asked, not taking my eyes off the light. Let's see what it is first. Jake said, standing up slowly. I stood too, but neither of us moved toward it right away. We just watched as the green bar made its way methodically past all the cars. It wasn't in a hurry. It moved like it had all the time in the world, which somehow made it even more unsettling. When it reached the last car, my grandfather's old pickup truck, the light paused for maybe 3 seconds, just stopped completely. Then it started moving again, heading behind the cabin where there's nothing but woods. "Come on," Jake whispered and started walking cautiously toward where the light had been. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We scurried around the cars, keeping our eyes on the green bar as it continued its steady path. As we moved away from the fire, the darkness pressing around us, I could barely make out Jake's shape ahead of me, just a silhouette against the slightly less dark background of the clearing. The light was rounding the corner of the cabin now, heading toward the back. There's nothing back there, just a small storage shed about 20 yards from the cabin, and then dense forest beyond that. No paths, no clearings, nothing. We followed it, staying maybe 30 feet behind. I don't know why we didn't call out or try to catch up to it. Something about that light made me instinctively keep my distance. As we moved around the cabin, we lost the faint glow from the fire pit completely. Now the only light was that green bar moving steadily ahead of us. The back of the cabin was pitch black. The few windows were dark. Everyone inside was asleep. I could hear Jake's breathing next to me as we paused at the corner of the building, watching the green light continue on its path toward the tree line. "What the hell is it?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. Jake didn't answer. He just put his hand on my arm, a gesture to stay quiet, I think. We stood there watching as the light maintained the exact same speed, never faltering, never changing. It was now approaching the edge of the woods. We started following again, moving slowly over the uneven ground. I nearly tripped on a root, catching myself just in time. The light didn't react to the sound at all. It just kept moving. Something strange was happening with the distance between us and the light. We were walking toward it, but somehow we weren't getting any closer. At the same time, it wasn't pulling away from us either. It was like we were locked at this exact distance, close enough to see it clearly, but never close enough to make out what was creating it. The light reached the first trees and continued on, now weaving between the trunks. We stopped at the edge of the woods. Even in the daytime, those woods are dense and hard to navigate. At night, with no flashlights, it would have been suicide to try to follow it in. So we stood there at the border between the clearing and the forest, watching as the green bar moved deeper among the trees. It was maybe 50 feet in now, still visible between the trunks, still moving at that same steady pace. And then it happened. The light didn't fade or flicker or gradually disappear. It simply vanished. 1 second it was there, gliding between two large oaks, and the next, nothing. Total darkness. It was so sudden it made me gasp, like someone had flipped a switch. We stood frozen, staring into the darkness where the light had been. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. I was straining my eyes so hard trying to see something, anything, that I started seeing spots. Should we go look? I finally whispered. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Let's go back." We turned and made our way carefully back around the cabin. The fire pit was just a dull red glow now, barely giving off any light at all. Neither of us spoke as we walked back to it. I felt cold despite the mild summer night, and I could tell Jake was shaken too. When we reached the fire, Jake kicked some dirt over the remaining embers. "We should go in," he said, his voice sounding more normal now, but still tight. "What about what we just saw?" I asked. He shrugged, but I could tell it was forced casualness. "I don't know what it was, but I don't think we should mention it to the others. You know how Grandpa gets with his ghost stories, and the kids will be scared." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I agreed. Part of me wanted to wake everyone up, to have more witnesses, to confirm we weren't losing our minds, but another part of me understood what Jake meant. What would we even say? That we saw a floating green bar of light that disappeared into the woods? It sounded ridiculous, even though I knew what I'd seen. We went inside, stepping carefully around sleeping cousins on air mattresses in the main room, and found our spots, Jake on the couch and me on the floor beside it. I don't think either of us slept much that night. I know I didn't. I kept replaying what we'd seen in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The next morning, while everyone was having breakfast, Jake and I went outside to check the area where we'd seen the light. In the daylight, there was nothing unusual, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing that would indicate anything had passed through there. We never mention it to the rest of the family. Over the years, Jake and I have brought up occasionally when we're alone, trying to figure out what it could have been. We looked online for similar experiences, researched strange lights in forests, checked local legends, everything. Nothing matches what we saw. Was it some kind of weird natural phenomenon? A prank by locals? Some military test? I've gone through every possible explanation, but none of them fit exactly what we witnessed. I've been back to the cabin several times since then. Each time I find myself staring into the darkness at night, watching for that green light. Part of me wants to see it again, to confirm it was real. Another part of me dreads the possibility. It's been 7 years, and I still get chills thinking about that night. The eeriest part wasn't just the light itself, but the deliberate way it moved, like it had purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. And sometimes, in the moments before sleep, I can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't moving away from us that night? What if it was leading us somewhere? And what would have happened if we'd followed it into those woods? The thing in the woods. I got to get this off my chest because it's been eating me alive. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I swear every word is true. Maybe someone out there has seen similar things and can help me make sense of it all. I've lived my entire life in this tiny speck of a town in rural Ohio, right near the Kentucky border. Our house sits on the edge of civilization, with nothing but 2 massive stretches of private forest behind us. Most days it's peaceful, beautiful, even, but there's something not right about those woods. Growing up, I spent countless hours exploring the forest. I know every creek bed, every fallen tree, every deer trail for miles. The wildlife was always what you'd expect. Plenty of deer, raccoons scavenging around, coyotes howling at night, and every couple years, a black bear passing through. Normal stuff. But then there are the other things. The things I can't explain. The first time I noticed something was off, I was 9 years old. My dad and I had been clearing brush near the edge of our property. We'd moved this massive log, had to be 50, maybe 60 pounds, and left in a pile by the tree lean. The next morning, I was waiting for the school bus at the end of our long driveway. It was early, still pretty dark out, and dead quiet except for the birds starting to wake up. That's when I heard it, a weird rustling sound coming from the trees, followed by this deep, rumbling growl that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. It wasn't like a dog or coyote. It was deeper, bigger. Before I could even process what I was hearing, there was a loud crack, and suddenly that same massive log we'd moved the day before came shooting out of brush like it had been fired from a cannon. The thing spun through the air and crashed halfway across our yard, way closer to me than it had any right to be. It wasn't rolled or pushed. It was thrown hard. Whatever threw it had to be incredibly strong. I froze completely. Couldn't even breathe. I kept staring at the tree lean, but I never saw what did it. After what felt like forever, the bus finally came, and I ran to it, never mentioning what happened to anyone. Who would believe a 9-year-old kid anyway? For a while after that, I convinced myself I'd imagine it or exaggerate it in my head. Maybe the log wasn't as heavy as I thought. Maybe an animal had just rolled it somehow. I came up with every explanation except the obvious one. Something in those woods had thrown it. A couple of years passed without incident. Then one night, when I was 11, I had 2 friends staying over. We were up late, probably around 11 or midnight, just talking and being stupid kids in my bedroom on the 2nd floor. My window faced the backyard and the forest beyond. I was in the middle of telling some dumb joke when one of my friends suddenly went quiet and pointed out the window. "What's that?" he asked. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it. A figure, unmistakably person-shaped, but wrong, walking along the tree lean at the edge of our property. This thing was enormous. Even from a distance, I could tell it was tall, 6 feet at minimum, but probably closer to 7 or 8. It had a weird hulking shape, super broad shoulders, and a thick upper body that tapered down. The proportions were just off, and the way it moved was the worst part. It was so quiet, so smooth, like it was gliding almost. No stumbling or crunching leaves like you'd expect from something that size moving through underbrush in the dark. All 3 of us saw it. We ducked down below the window sill immediately like we'd rehearsed it. Nobody said a word. We were terrified it would somehow know we'd seen it. After a few minutes, we worked up the courage to peek again, but whatever was had moved on. We didn't look out that window again until morning. The next day, my friends and I tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was just some guy trespassing, hunting illegally on our land. But deep down, we all knew that explanation didn't fit. The size was wrong. The movement was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. For years after that, I'd occasionally hear strange noises at night. Heavy footsteps circling our house sometimes, or branches breaking way too loudly in the distance. But I never saw anything substantial again until a few years ago. I'd taken up jogging to stay in shape, and I'd mapped out this trail that went pretty deep into the forest behind our property. On this particular day, it was early autumn, perfect weather for a long run. I'd gone about a mile past where people usually venture. There are no marked trails back there, just game paths and natural clearings. I was pushing myself, feeling good, when I had to navigate through a patch of thorny bushes. They were thick and grabby, tearing at my clothes. But I knew there was a nice little clearing on the other side that would make for easier running. When I broke through to the clearing, the first thing that hit me was a silence. I'm not talking about peace and quiet. I'm talking about complete and utter silence. No bird singing, no leaves rustling, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. I stopped running immediately, that instinctive part of my brain screaming that something was very, very wrong. That's when I heard it, the sound of heavy branches snapping to my left. Not small twigs breaking under a rabbit's weight, but thick branches being shattered. I turned toward the noise, and what I saw still keeps me up at night. About 30 yards away, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing, was something. It was enormous, standing upright on two legs, but moving with a speed that nothing that size should be capable of. It was covered in thick, matted fur, mostly black, but with streaks of dark brown and patchy tan areas. The fur wasn't uniform or clean like you'd see on a healthy animal. It looked ragged, almost like it was partially missing in places. I couldn't make out its face clearly. Thank God for that, but I caught a glimpse of its profile as it sprinted across the gap between two thick trees. The head seemed too small for the body, almost sitting directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck. Its arms were long, swinging as it ran, occasionally using them to push off trees to change direction. It moved with this terrifying purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing, and it was fast, freakishly, impossibly fast. It crossed that clearing in seconds, disappearing into the dense forest on the other side. I stood frozen for maybe 10 seconds before my survival instinct kicked in. I turned and ran back toward home faster than I've ever run in my life, not caring about the thorns tearing at my skin as I crashed back through those bushes. The entire time I felt like something was right behind me, about to grab me with massive hands. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the tree lean and saw my house. Since then, things have gotten worse. 2 winters ago, after a heavy snow, I found footprints leading from the woods up to our house and around the back. They were huge, easily 15 inches long, and the stride length was close to 4 feet. Whatever made them was taking steps twice as long as a normal human. I've heard tree knocks at night. Hard, deliberate sounds of wood striking wood. Sometimes they come in patterns. 3 quick knocks, then 2 slow ones, then 3 quick again, like some kind of signal. Other nights, I've heard what sounds almost like a distant voice, too low and guttural to be human, but definitely trying to mimic speech. Twice now, something has slammed into the side of our house hard enough to rattle the windows and knock pictures off the wall. The first time, I thought a deer had crashed into it. The second time, it hit with such force that I'm certain it was intentional. When I checked outside both times, I found nothing. No blood, no fur, no evidence of what had struck with such force. The stray cats that used to hang around our property have almost all vanished. We used to have at least 6 or 7 that we'd feed occasionally. Now there's only one, and it refuses to venture more than a few feet from the porch, even for food. I don't know if what I've been seeing is one creature or several. I don't know if it's some undiscovered species or something else. What I do know is that I'm not imagining it, and it's not going away. If anything, it seems bolder now, coming closer to the house, staying visible for longer periods. Last week, I was taking the trash out at dusk when I heard breathing. Not just any breathing, deep, rumbling breaths from something with massive lungs. It was coming from just beyond the tree line, not 20 yards from where I stood. I dropped the trash bag and ran inside, locking the door behind me. I've thought about setting up game cameras, but part of me doesn't want to know. What if I catch something on film that doesn't make sense? What if I see something I can't unsee? Or worse, what if these things become aware they're being watched and decide to do something about it? My parents think I'm letting my imagination run wild. No one in town talks about anything strange in those woods, though a few of the older locals get real quiet when I bring up weird noises at night. One old-timer at the general store just shook his head and told me, some parts of those woods ain't meant for people. Never were. Then he changed the subject. Whatever walks those border woods is still out there. I hear it most nights now, circling closer, testing boundaries. I don't go jogging in the deep woods anymore. I don't even like being outside after dark. But I can't move away. This is my home, my family's land for generations. So I'm stuck here, listening to something massive moving just beyond the trees, wondering when it'll decide to stop watching and finally show itself completely, and wondering what I'll do when that happens. I've been putting off writing this for months, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened during that night shift at the school where I work as a security guard. This happened back in April 2020, right when CO was hitting hard. The school I work at is this old New England campus. Been around since the late 1800s. It's one of those prestigious boarding schools with beautiful old brick buildings mixed with some newer construction. When the pandemic hit, they evacuated all the students practically overnight. One day, the place was bustling with teenagers. The next day, it was a ghost town. I'd worked there for about 3 years at that point, but I'd never seen the campus completely empty before. Usually, even during breaks, there were international students who stayed behind or faculty members living in their campus housing. But with CO, it was just the security guards, 4 of us total working in rotation. The campus is pretty spread out. There are 8 student dormitories, beautiful old brick buildings with slate roofs. There's also what we call the adult dorm where some teachers live, but the top floors have been abandoned for years. We have these old condos that got converted to administrative offices, an old Victorian house that's now the admissions office, a New England church, a boathouse down by the river, an old library, and the original school building which dates back to the school's founding. Then there are the newer buildings, the rec center, sports complex, science building, and art center, all built within the last 15 years. My shift that night started at 11 p.m. It was unseasonably cold for April, and there was this eerie fog hanging over the campus. I remember thinking how the empty buildings looked like something out of a horror movie, all dark and looming in the mist. We were supposed to do a full campus check every 2 hours, which meant walking through every building to make sure nothing was amiss. This was new protocol because of the pandemic. They were worried about break-ins or vandalism with the campus being so empty. I started my first round at midnight. The newer buildings were fine. Nothing unusual. I checked the rec center, which has this big indoor pool that was covered and drained. The whole place smelled like chlorine, even though nobody had used it in weeks. The sports complex was normal, too, just dark and empty. The silence was what got to me the most. Usually, these places would have sounds. Fans running, students talking, music playing, but now there was just nothing. Everything was going fine until I got to the science building around 1 o'clock in the morning. The science building is connected to the old school building by an enclosed walkway. I just finished checking all 3 floors of the science center and was about to cross over. That's when I heard it. Footsteps running footsteps on the floor above me. I froze because it made no sense. I was on the top floor of the science building, and the only thing above me was a mechanical room with the HVAC systems, which was only accessible from outside. And these weren't mechanical sounds. They were unmistakably footsteps like someone wearing hard-soled shoes running across the floor. I called out, "Hello, security here." Is someone there? My voice echoed in the empty hallway. The footsteps stopped immediately. I figured maybe it was one of the other guards, though they weren't supposed to be in this section. I radioed in. Hey, is anyone in the science building? My colleague Tony responded. Negative. I'm over in the library, and Jake is in the admin building. You all right? Yeah, just thought I heard something. Probably the building settling. But I knew that wasn't it. Buildings settling don't sound like running footsteps. I crossed over into the old school building, which always gave me the creeps, even when it was full of people. It's 4 stories tall with narrow hallways, creaky wooden floors, and classrooms with those old-fashioned transoms above the doors. The first floor was quiet, and I methodically checked each classroom, turning my flashlight into dark corners and behind doors. As I started up the stairs to the second floor, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were directly above me on the 3rd floor. Quick steps moving from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopping. I hesitated on the stairs, my heart starting to pound. I told myself it had to be an explanation. Maybe an animal got in somehow, a raccoon or something. But deep down, I knew those were human footsteps. I made my way to the 2nd floor, listening. Nothing. I continued up to the 3rd floor, where I'd heard the sounds. The hallway was empty. All classroom doors were closed and locked as they should be. I checked each one anyway, rattling the handles to confirm they were secure. They were. Just as I was about to head up to the 4th floor, I heard footsteps again, but this time they were coming from the floor below me, where I'd just been. It sounded like someone running from one end of the hallway to the other. My mouth went dry. There was no way anyone could have gotten past me on the stairs. The building only had one staircase that connected all floors, and I would have seen someone. I radioed in again. Guys, are you absolutely sure no one else is in the old school building? Positive, came the reply. What's going on? I keep hearing footsteps, but there's nobody here. Old buildings make noise, man. Especially when the temperature changes at night. Yeah, maybe. I decided to skip the 4th floor of the old building. At this point, I just wanted to get out of there. I headed back down the stairs, moving quickly, but trying not to run. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was scared, but I was. I left the old school building and headed for the art center, which was my next stop. The art center is one of the newer buildings with big open spaces for the art studios, music practice rooms, and a small theater. I figured I'd feel better in there. Newer buildings are less creepy, right? I used my key card to enter through the main doors. The lobby was dark except for the exit signs casting a red glow. I turned on the lights and felt some of my tension ease in the bright modern space. That's when I heard the voices. They were faint at first, just the sound of 2 people talking, their words indistinct, but the cadence unmistakable. It sounded like they were upstairs, maybe in one of the practice rooms or art studios. Hello, I called out. Security. The building is supposed to be closed. The voices continued uninterrupted. They didn't seem to notice or care that I was there. I headed up the stairs to the 2nd floor, where I thought the voices were coming from. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs, the talking stopped abruptly. Then came a loud slam like a door being forcefully closed. I moved toward the sound, which seemed to come from the multi-purpose room, a space used for club meetings and movie screenings. The door was closed but not locked. I hesitated, then opened it slowly. The room was empty. No sign that anyone had been there. The chairs were stacked against the wall, and the projection screen was rolled up. I checked behind the AV cabinet and in the small storage closet. Nothing. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. There's a large window on one wall of the room, and with the lights on, it created a reflection of the room. In that reflection, I saw something that wasn't there when I looked directly at the room. A face. A blue face like someone who couldn't breathe. It was shorter than me, maybe the height of a young teenager, and it seemed to be struggling for air. I spun around, but there was nobody there. I looked back at the window, and the reflection was gone. I've never felt fear like that before. My whole body went cold, and I couldn't move for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then I ran. I just flat out ran out of that room, down the stairs, and out of the building. I didn't even turn off the lights. Outside, I stood in the parking lot, trying to catch my breath and convince myself I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. My radio crackled. It was my supervisor wondering why I'd stopped reporting my location. I'm outside the art center. I managed to say, taking a short break. Everything all right? Yeah, fine. I couldn't bring myself to finish the security check that night. I went back to the guard station and made up some excuse about not feeling well. The next day, I told my boss what happened. He's this older British guy who's been working at the school for decades. I expected him to laugh it off, but he didn't. Instead, he told me two stories. The first was about his own experience in one of the old buildings years ago when he felt cornered by something he couldn't see but could definitely feel. He said he'd never been so terrified in his life. The second story was about the history of the campus. Apparently, back in the early 1900s, there were two boys who used to play on a homemade raft in the river near where the boathouse now stands. One day, one of the boys fell off and drowned. The other boy tried to get help, but it was too late. According to my boss, there have been sightings over the years of what people believe is the ghost of the drowned boy, a bluish figure that seems to be struggling to breathe. I've worked plenty of night shifts since then, but I've never experienced anything like that again. I still avoid the art center and the old school building when I can, especially at night. Sometimes I wonder if the emptiness of the campus during COVID somehow stirred things up, like the absence of living people, made it easier for the dead to be noticed. I don't know what I believe about ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I heard and I know what I saw. That blue face in the window. I'll never forget it. And I can't help but wonder if that poor drowned boy is still there trying to get someone's attention after all these years. I've never told anyone about this before. I mean, I've tried explaining it to people, but they always brush it off as a weird childhood memory or me misremembering things. But I know what I saw that day at Camp Pinewood. And even now, 23 years later, I still can't explain it. This happened when I was 11 years old. My parents had shipped me off to summer camp in northern Michigan for 3 weeks. Something about building character and getting fresh air. I wasn't particularly outdoorsy, but I didn't mind it too much. The camp was pretty standard. Swimming in the lake, archery, campfires, all that stuff. We slept in these small wooden cabins with 4 bunks each. My cabin mates were 3 other boys my age. Tanner, who was super into dinosaurs and could tell you the difference between an Allosaurus and a T-Rex like it was common knowledge. Derek, who was always sneaking in candy and had this ridiculous collection of Pokemon cards he brought, despite the counselor saying not to, and Mike, who was the athletic one, always talking about the baseball league he played in back home. We got along pretty well, considering we were just random kids thrown together. The cabin itself was nothing special. Wooden walls with little windows, bunk beds with thin mattresses, and this perpetual smell of pine and boys who didn't shower enough. My bunk was on the bottom right by the door, which I hated because people would always bump into my feet when they walked in. One of the camp's weird traditions was this mandatory quiet hour right after lunch. They called it rest period. But everyone knew it was really just nap time for kids, which felt ridiculous when you're 11 and think you're basically grown up. None of us ever actually slept during quiet hour. Instead, we'd whisper jokes or talk about whatever 11-year-old boys talk about, mostly gross stuff or complaining about which counselors were meanest. This particular day was maybe our 5th or 6th day at camp. It was hot dash, that sticky, humid kind of heat where your t-shirt just clings to your back. Lunch had been these saddle-looking hot dogs and baked beans that no one wanted to eat. We trudged back to our cabin for quiet hour, flopped on our bunks, and started our usual whisper conversations. Derek was telling us about how he'd snuck into the kitchen area and saw 2 of the counselors kissing, and we were all cracking up, not even trying to be quiet at this point. We were laughing, making kissing noises the whole thing. Mike was doing some ridiculous impression of the counselors, and Tanner was practically crying from laughing so hard. Then we heard footsteps on the wooden stairs outside our cabin door. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, the kind that said, "You're in trouble." "It's Jenkins," Derek hissed, referring to the head counselor, this middle-aged guy with a permanent sunburn and a voice that could cut through solid rock. We all immediately shut up and dove under our covers. I remember pulling my scratchy wool blanket right up to my chin and closing my eyes, trying to control my breathing to seem asleep. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was at the door could hear it. The thing about quiet hour was that if you got caught talking 3 times, you had to sit out the evening activity, which that night was supposed to be a bonfire with Eskimo rays. The door creaked open. I kept my eyes shut tight, but I could sense the light changing as someone stood in the doorway. There was this moment of complete silence, and then a voice, but it wasn't Jenkins. It was Mr. Harmon, the camp director. He rarely interacted with us directly, usually leaving that to counselors. His voice was soft but firm, with this weird accent I couldn't place, not quite Southern, but something else. "You boys should be sleeping, not talking," he said very matter-of-factly. "Rest now." That was it. No scolding, no threats of punishment, just those few words. Then I heard the door close and his footsteps moving away. The whole interaction couldn't have taken more than 20 seconds. We'd gotten off easy, surprisingly easy. I waited about 30 seconds to make sure he was gone, then opened my eyes, ready to look over at the others and share a relieved laugh. But what I saw made my blood run cold. All 3 of them, Derek, Tanner, and Mike, were asleep, not pretending, but actually genuinely asleep. Derek had his mouth slightly open, breathing deeply. Tanner was curled up on his side, his face peaceful. Mike was flat on his back, chest rising and falling rhythmically. At first, I thought they were playing a joke on me. I whispered, "Guys, he's gone." No response. I tried again, a bit louder. "Hey guys, cut it out." Nothing. I sat up in my bed and looked at them more carefully. These weren't kids pretending to be asleep. I'd seen my little brother fake sleep plenty of times, and this wasn't that. They were out completely. I got up and walked over to Derek's bunk first, since it was closest to mine. I poked his shoulder. Derek, no reaction. I shook him a little harder. Nothing. His body was completely limp, his breathing deep and regular. I moved on to Tanner, then Mike, with the same results. They were all in this deep, unresponsive sleep. The weirdest part was how quickly it had happened. We had all been awake, wide awake, laughing and joking, literally seconds before. Then Mr. Harmon says a few words, and suddenly everyone but me is in a deep sleep. It made no sense. I went back to my bunk and sat there trying to process what was happening. The cabin had taken on this eerie quality I can't quite explain. It was still the same wooden walls, the same light filtering through the windows, but something felt different. The air seemed heavier, thicker somehow. There was this complete silence, except for the steady breathing of my cabin mates. I remember staring at the wall, this naughty pine plank right next to my bed, with a weird pattern in the wood that kind of looked like a face if you squinted. I stared at it for what felt like a long time, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had Mr. Harmon done something to them? Was there something in the food at lunch that had finally kicked in? Was I going crazy? None of these explanations made any sense. But what I was seeing made even less sense. The whole thing was so unsettling that I eventually just laid back down. I didn't feel tired. I was actually wide awake from the adrenaline of the whole weird situation, but I just didn't know what else to do. I stared at the bunk above me, counting the wood slats supporting the mattress. 1, 2, 3. I must have eventually fallen asleep. 2, because the next thing I remember is being jolted awake by the camp bell ringing, signaling the end of quiet hour. I sat up quickly, disoriented. Around me, the other boys were waking up too, stretching and yawning like it was the most normal thing in the world. Derek was already talking about the swimming test we were supposed to do that afternoon. Completely casual. "Guys," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me, "do you remember what happened before we fell asleep?" They looked at me with confused expressions. "What do you mean?" Mike asked, pulling on his sneakers. "Before quiet hour, we were all talking, and then Mr. Harmon came in, and then you all just fell asleep." Tanner laughed. "I don't remember Mr. Harmon. I was out as soon as my head hit the pillow. Those beans at lunch made me so sleepy." "Yeah, I don't remember anything," Derek added. "Just laid down and conked out." I looked at them in disbelief, but we were laughing about the counselors kissing. You were all wide awake, and then Mr. Harmon came in and said we should be sleeping, and then you all just instantly fell asleep, like within seconds. They all exchanged glances. Dude, you must have been dreaming, Mike said, shrugging. I don't remember any of that. Yeah, I was definitely asleep the whole time, Tanner agreed. I tried to argue to make them remember, but they all had the same story. They'd come into the cabin, laid down, and fallen asleep almost immediately. None of them remembered talking or laughing. None of them remembered Mr. Harmon coming in. I eventually gave up trying to convince them. We went on with our day. Swimming test dinner, the bonfire with Esmores at night. But I couldn't shake the memory of what had happened or the unsettling feeling it left me with. The rest of camp passed without any similar incidents. I kept a close eye on Mr. Harmon whenever I saw him, but he never acted any differently toward me or acknowledged what had happened. He was just a camp director doing camp director things, making announcements at meals, chatting with parents on visiting day, organizing the end of camp talent show. When I got home, I tried telling my parents about it, but they dismissed it as a dream or my imagination. Over the years, I've occasionally brought up with friends, but the story always gets the same reaction. Either I dreamed it or misremembered, or it was just kids falling asleep because they were tired. But I know what I saw. I was wide awake. My cabin mates were wide awake. And then, in the span of 20 seconds, they weren't. But I still was. Sometimes I wonder if there was something in Mr. Harmon's words, some kind of hypnotic suggestion, or as ridiculous as it sounds, some kind of sleeping charm that somehow didn't work on me. Or maybe time did something weird in that cabin. Maybe I experienced some kind of time skip where what felt like seconds to me was actually minutes or even hours to everyone else. Enough time for them to naturally fall asleep. I've never been back to Camp Pinewood. My parents sent me to a different camp the next summer, and after that, I was old enough to stay home alone. I've tried searching online for information about Mr. Harmon or the camp, but it closed down in the early 2000s, and there's very little information available. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that cabin. Logic says there must be some rational explanation, but I've never been able to find one that fits. All I know is that I witnessed something I can't explain. Something that still gives me chills when I think about it too much. And sometimes when I'm having trouble falling asleep at night, I find myself thinking about Mr. Harmon's words. You should be sleeping, not talking. Rest now. And wondering what power those simple words held over everyone but me. I've never shared this online before, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. It all started when I was about 7 years old, and it was the first time I experienced something unexplainable. Looking back now, it makes more sense why my mom always used to say that I attracted things from the spiritual realm. She'd tell stories about how even as a baby, weird things would happen around me. Toys turning on by themselves, lights flickering when I cried, that kind of stuff. I never thought much of it until I got older. My childhood wasn't exactly normal to begin with. My father died in a car accident when I was really young. I barely remember him, just fragments really. The smell of his aftershave, the sound of his laugh. My little sister had a different dad who had struggled with severe depression for years before ultimately taking his own life. So it was just us three, me, my sister, and my mom trying to make it work. My mom was amazing, working long shifts at the hospital to support us. But that meant she wasn't always around at night. She'd drop us off at different family friends who would babysit us while she worked those late hospital shifts. I never minded it much. It felt like having lots of aunts and uncles who weren't really related to us. One of these family friends was Rhonda. God, I haven't thought about her in years. She was this warm, gentle woman with the softest hands and the kindest smile. Her house always smelled like cinnamon and something else I could never quite place. Maybe vanilla. She lived alone in this modest 2-story house that had these creaky wooden floors. I remember being fascinated by her 2 talking birds, these colorful parakeetses that would repeat simple phrases like hello and what's up. I'd spend hours trying to teach them new words, but they never seemed interested in expanding their vocabulary beyond what they already knew. Anyway, this particular night I'm about to tell you about happened during summer break. My mom had a night shift, So she dropped us off at Rhonda's around 7 in the evening. It was still light outside, and we spent the first few hours watching cartoons and eating Rhonda's homemade chocolate chip cookies. My sister, who was about 5 at the time, was always clingy and afraid of everything. She hated sleeping alone and would throw absolute fits if forced to. When it got late around 9 or 10, Rhonda announced it was bedtime. My sister immediately started whining about not wanting to sleep alone, so Rhonda said she could sleep in her room upstairs. I, on the other hand, always got the spare bedroom downstairs. I didn't usually mind. It had these cool glow-in-the-dark star stickers on the ceiling that I loved watching as I fell asleep. That night, Rhonda tucked me in like she always did. She had this routine where she'd pull the covers up to my chin, kiss my forehead, and then check under the bed and in the closet for monsters. She'd leave the door cracked open just enough to let a thin strip of hallway light in. And then she'd head upstairs with my sister. I remember lying there in that bed, staring at those plastic stars that were slowly losing their glow. The house had these weird sounds that I'd normally ignore. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house settling, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. But that night, everything seemed louder somehow, more present, more intentional. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the best way I can describe it. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours. I couldn't get comfortable, and this strange anxiety kept building in my chest. I wasn't normally an anxious kid, but that night I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, fear, but I couldn't pinpoint why. There was no thunderstorm, no scary movie I'd watched, nothing that should have triggered this feeling. The digital alarm clock on the nightstand read 11:32. I remember staring at those red numbers, debating whether I should go upstairs to Rhonda's room. I didn't want to seem like a baby. I was the big sister, after all. But something just felt off. I had almost convinced myself to get up when it happened. A voice, low, calm, and distinctly male, said, "Marissa, it's okay. Just go to sleep." It was so clear, so close, like someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. But when I jerked up to look, nobody was there. The room was empty except for me. Here's the weird part. I wasn't scared. Not immediately. Anyway, looking back as an adult, I should have been terrified. A strange man's voice in my room when I was alone. That's nightmare fuel. But as a 7-year-old who hadn't yet been conditioned to fear the paranormal, my first thought was more like, oh, someone's trying to help me sleep. The voice had this soothing quality to it, kind of like how you'd imagine a big brother or a nice uncle would sound. There was no malice in it, no threatening undertone, just gentle reassurance. And strangely enough, it worked. The anxiety that had been building in my chest started to dissipate. My eyelids grew heavy, and before I knew it, I was drifting off to sleep. I don't remember dreaming that night, just falling into this deep, peaceful sleep until morning. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of the birds chattering away in the living room. I rubbed my eyes, momentarily forgetting about the voice in the night before until I walked into the kitchen and saw Rhonda at the stove flipping pancakes. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said with that warm smile of hers. "How did you sleep?" I climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, my legs dangling above the floor. I was scared at first. I said matter-of-factly in the way that only kids can be, but then somebody told me to go to sleep, and I did. Rhonda's hand paused mid-flip. "What do you mean somebody told you to go to sleep? Did you have a dream?" I shook my head emphatically. No, I was awake. I couldn't sleep, and I was going to come upstairs. But then a voice told me it was okay and to go to sleep. She set the spatula down slowly and turned to face me fully. A voice, was it a man's voice or a woman's voice? A man's? I replied, reaching for syrup. He knew my name. He called me Marissa. I'll never forget the look on Rhonda's face in that moment. It was like watching someone's warm, comfortable expression crack and reveal something underneath. Not fear exactly, but a kind of uncomfortable recognition. Her smile stiffened, and she turned back to the stove quickly, her shoulders tense. "Well, you probably were dreaming and just don't remember falling asleep," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too forced. Dreams can seem very real sometimes. Before I could protest again that I was definitely awake, she changed the subject, asking if I wanted chocolate chips in my pancakes. And just like that, the moment passed. My sister came bounding down the stairs, complaining loudly about how the birds woke her up, and the rest of the morning carried on normally. My mom picked us up around noon, and I didn't think to mention the voice to her. Kids are resilient like that. Weird things happen, and we just absorb them into our understanding of the world, without much question. It wasn't until years later, when I was about 14, that the memory resurfaced. I was having a sleepover at a friend's house, and we were telling ghost stories. When it was my turn, I shared the story about the voice at Rhonda's house. As I was telling it, I realized how creepy it actually was, how it should have terrified me at the time. My friend was appropriately freaked out and insisted I ask my mom if Rhonda's house was haunted. The next day, I casually brought it up to my mom while she was folding laundry. "Hey, Mom, remember when Rhonda used to babysit us? Was her house haunted or something?" My mom paused, a half-folded towel in her hands. "Why do you ask that?" I shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. I just remembered this weird thing that happened once. I heard a man's voice in the spare bedroom downstairs. It knew my name. The towel dropped from her hands, and she sat down on the edge of the bed. "You never told me about that." I guess I forgot until now. It wasn't scary or anything. The voice was nice. My mom looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but Rhonda had a son." "Had?" I asked, immediately picking up on the past tense. She nodded slowly. "He died in that room, the spare bedroom where you used to sleep. It was an overdose. Accidental. He was only in his 20s. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warm summer day. What was he like? A lot like Rhonda, actually. Kind, caring, always looking out for others. He had his demons, but he was a good person at heart." She paused and added, "That's probably why you weren't afraid when he spoke to you. Some presences aren't meant to frighten." That conversation opened something up in me. Or maybe it had always been open, and I just became more aware of it. Since that first experience, I've had many more encounters with things I can't explain. Shadow figures standing at the foot of my bed, objects moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms. The thing is, they've changed over the years. That first voice, the one I now believe belonged to Rhonda's son, was comforting, protective even. But as I've gotten older, the encounters have become darker, more hostile. Like whatever door was open in my childhood has let in entities that don't have my best interests at heart. I'm 32 now, and just last week, I woke up at 3:17 in the morning to find all the kitchen cabinets open. Every single one. I live alone. No one else has keys to my apartment. Sometimes I wonder if that night at Rhonda set something in motion, made me more receptive to things most people can't perceive. Or maybe my mom was right all along. Maybe I've always attracted things from the spiritual realm, and that voice was just the first one I was old enough to remember. Either way, I can't help but long for simplicity of that first encounter. A gentle voice telling me everything would be okay, because the things I sense watching me now, they don't feel gentle at all. I'm not even sure where to begin with this. I've been dealing with this nightmare for years now, and it's gotten to the point where I dread nighttime. Everyone talks about how nice it is to crawl into bed after a long day, to feel that sweet relief when your head hits the pillow. I honestly can't remember what that feels like. It started gradually. At first, I just had this weird feeling of not being alone in my room at night. You know that sensation when you think someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I'd be drifting off to sleep and suddenly feel wide awake, my heart racing for no reason. Then I started seeing them. These, I don't even know what to call them. Shadow people. But that doesn't quite capture it. They're like stretched out human silhouettes, completely black, standing around my room. They appear right as I'm about to fall asleep. That crucial moment when you're drifting off but still slightly aware. I'll be almost gone. And then suddenly I'll see one of these things in the corner of my room, or beside my bed, or sometimes even leaning over me. And I'm instantly wide awake again, adrenaline pumping, too terrified to close my eyes. What's even weirder is this feeling I get in my chest right before I see them. It's like a physical warning system. There's this pressure, kind of painful, but not exactly. It's hard to describe. It's like a force or a sound, but inside my body. It's as if something is desperately trying to wake me up to keep me from falling asleep completely. And when I ignore it, that's when the really bad stuff happens. I've tried everything. Sleep aids just make it worse because then I'm too groggy to snap myself awake when I need to. I've moved apartments twice thinking maybe it was something about the place, but they followed me. I've gone to doctors who just throw antidepressants or anxiety meds at me, which don't help at all. One even suggested I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but I can move just fine during these episodes. Eventually, I just learn to function on whatever scraps of sleep I can get. Usually, I'll fight until I literally pass out from exhaustion for a few hours. It's not real sleep, not the restorative kind, but it's all I get. My whole life revolves around this now. I've lost jobs because I can't focus. Friends think I'm flaky because I cancel plans when I'm too exhausted. Dating is completely off the table. How do you explain to someone that they can't sleep over because the shadow people only appear when you're alone? But the worst part isn't the shadows themselves. It's what happens when I get desperate enough to ignore my body's warnings and try to force myself to sleep. Anyway, it's only happened 3 times, and each time was more terrifying than the last. The first time was about 2 years ago. I was going on 4 days with barely any sleep. I was hallucinating from exhaustion during the day, seeing things move in my peripheral vision, hearing whispers. I decided I was going to sleep no matter what. I turned my face to the wall and pulled the blanket up over my head completely. My thinking was simple. If I couldn't see them, maybe they wouldn't bother me. It actually worked for about an hour. I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Then I felt it. A hand. A large, cold hand with long, sharp nails. It started at the top of my head, just lightly touching my hair through the blanket. Then it slowly, so slowly, dragged down the back of my neck, across my shoulders and down my spine. The touch was deliberate, almost curious. I was paralyzed with fear for a few seconds. Then I launched myself out of bed, turning on every light in my apartment. I searched everywhere. Under the bed, though there is no under, I sleep on a mattress directly on the floor, in the closet behind the curtains. Nothing, no one. The doors were locked, windows closed. I was completely alone, which somehow made it worse. I didn't sleep for 2 more days after that. The second time was about 6 months later. I've been doing a bit better, managing to get maybe 3 hours a night by keeping a strict routine and sleeping with all the lights on. But one night, I was just so tired. I lay on my back with my arms crossed over my chest, trying to calm my racing mind. I felt the pressure in my chest, the warning, but I was so exhausted I pushed through it. Just as I was falling asleep, I jolted awake, and for just a millisecond, literally the briefest flash, I saw it. There was a black figure, humanoid, but wrong somehow, squatting directly on my chest. It was staring at me. I know that sounds impossible because it had no eyes, no face that I could discern, just a black silhouette. But I could feel its gaze. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was studying me. And even though it disappeared almost instantly, the feeling of being watched lingered for hours. I didn't try to ignore the warnings after that. I stuck to my exhaustion-induced mini blackouts for months. But about 8 weeks ago, I hit another wall. I hadn't had more than an hour of sleep at a time for over a week. I was making mistakes at work, almost crashed my car twice. I was desperate. I decided to try sleeping on my back again, thinking maybe the second incident was just a particularly bad episode of sleep paralysis like the doctor suggested. I laid down, felt the warning in my chest, and deliberately pushed past it. I was drifting off when I felt my mattress depressed like someone sitting down on the edge of my bed. I was frozen, too scared to open my eyes. Then I felt my blanket, which was pulled up to my nose, being slowly pulled down, exposing my face. The movement was gentle, almost tender. What happened next still makes me feel sick when I think about it. I felt what seemed like a kiss on my cheek near my neck. It was soft at first, and in my half-asleep state, it reminded me of how my mom used to wake me up when I was little. But then the pressure increased. What started as a kiss turned into a strong suction, like someone giving me a hickey, but much more powerful. It felt like it was trying to pull something out of me through my skin. I finally managed to break through my fear and jumped up, screaming. There was nothing there, just my empty room. The next morning, there was a dark bruise on my neck. I called my mom in a panic, wondering if maybe she had somehow been there, as crazy as that sounds. She was confused and concerned, telling me she'd been at home on the rooftop garden all night about 30 miles away. What makes all of this even more frustrating is that none of it happens when someone else is in the room with me. A few times when things were really bad, I've had a friend crash on my couch, and I slept perfectly those nights. No shadows, no warnings, no visitors. But I can't exactly ask people to sleep over every night forever. I'm at my breaking point. Last night, I saw 5 of the shadow figures, more than ever before. They were standing in a semicircle around my bed, just watching. The warning in my chest was so intense, it felt like I was having a heart attack. I've started hallucinating them during the day now, too. Just glimpses in dark corners or reflections. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they're fixated on me. Sometimes I think maybe I'm just losing my mind from chronic sleep deprivation. But the physical evidence, the bruise on my neck, the feeling of those nails on my back, it was all too real. I'm typing this at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm too scared to close my eyes. They're here again, just at the edges of my vision, waiting. I feel like they're getting impatient with me, like they're building up to something. The warning in my chest has been constant for the past 2 days, not just when I'm trying to sleep. If anyone has experienced anything like this or knows what might be happening, please help me. I just want to sleep. I just want one night of peace without feeling like something is waiting for me to let my guard down. I'm so tired, so incredibly tired. I've started to wonder if maybe that's the point. Maybe they're wearing me down on purpose. Maybe when I'm too exhausted to fight anymore, that's when whatever they're planning will happen. And the thought that terrifies me most is, what if the 3 incidents weren't the worst of it? What if those were just the beginning? The hand that waited. I was the first time I heard the tapping. 5 the first time I saw the hand. And old enough now to know that the way I remember those nights isn't how memory is supposed to work. Childhood memories blur. Colors run. Edges soften. This one never did. It stayed perfect and cold, like a coin kept in the freezer. Orange nightlight glow. The rough buzz of carpet on my knees. The hallway air colder than my blanket. The sewing room that wasn't a room but a wall of absolute black. And then a hand, no arm, no wrist, offered palm up from that black like a question I was too small to answer. I've told this story out loud, maybe 5 times in my life. Each time I stripped pieces off it to make it easier to carry. I was young, I was dreaming, it was a shadow, it was a trick of the eyes. The people who love me accept those easy versions because they want to and because I let them, but it happened, and what followed happened, and I am going to try, for once, to tell it the way it sits in me. Not tidy, not cinematic, just true. The first night, I woke